The roses arrived at exactly 7 in the morning. 24 red roses, their petals still wet with morning dew, arranged in a crystal vase that caught the pale February light streaming through the kitchen window. Elena Marchetti stood in her silk robe, her fingers trembling as she read the card attached to the arrangement. The handwriting was not her husband's. The words were not meant for her. To my forever love, tonight, room 412, yours always. She read it 3 times, 4 times, 5. The words did not change. The handwriting remained foreign, delicate, feminine, and the signature at the bottom, a single letter M with a heart, confirmed what her gut had suspected for months, but her heart had refused to believe. Marcus was having an affair. Elena set the card down on the marble countertop, her hand moving slowly, deliberately, as if any sudden movement might shatter the fragile reality she had constructed over the past 8 years of marriage. 8 years of believing in the man who had swept her off her feet at that charity gala in Manhattan. 8 years of trusting the successful businessman who traveled frequently, who received calls at odd hours, who sometimes came home with shadows in his eyes that she had learned not to question. The penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side had never felt so cold. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, New York City spread out beneath her like a glittering promise, but Elena saw none of its beauty. She saw only the roses. The wound card. The evidence of a lie she could no longer ignore. She had been a nurse when they met, a simple woman from Queens with student loans and a 1-bedroom apartment she shared with 2 roommates. Marcus Marchetti had appeared like a figure from another world, tailored suits, confident smile, eyes the color of storm clouds before rain. He had pursued her with an intensity that left her breathless, showering her with attention, with gifts, with a love that felt almost too perfect to be real. Perhaps it had been. Eleanor walked through the apartment like a ghost, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floors. The penthouse was beautiful. Everyone said so. 3,000 square feet of carefully curated luxury, with artwork on the walls that cost more than her parents' house in Queens. But as she moved through the living room, past the white leather sofas and the grand piano no one ever played, she realized she had never truly felt at home here. She had felt safe, protected, provided. But home? No. Home was something else entirely. Home was warmth and truth and the kind of love that did not require hidden phone calls and mysterious absences. Her reflection caught her attention in the mirror above the fireplace. At 32, Eleanor still had the same dark hair and green eyes that Marcus had claimed to fall in love with. But there were lines now around those eyes, faint traces of worry that makeup could not quite conceal. She had aged in this marriage, she realized. Not in years, but in something deeper. In trust. The sound of keys in the door made her freeze. Marcus entered the apartment with the easy confidence of a man who owned the world. At 45, he was still devastatingly handsome. Silver threading through his dark hair only added to his authority. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and his grey eyes swept the room before landing on her. "You're up early," he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. He crossed to the kitchen, loosening his tie, and that was when he saw the flowers. His hand stopped mid-movement, just for a second, just long enough for Elena to notice. "They arrived this morning," she said, keeping her voice steady through sheer force of will. "Beautiful arrangement, though I'm curious, when did you start signing cards with the letter M?" The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. Marcus turned to face her fully, and something shifted in his expression. The easy charm faded, replaced by something harder, more calculating. For the first time in their marriage, Elena felt like she was seeing the real man behind the mask. "Elena," he began, but she raised her hand to stop him. Don't insult me with excuses or explanations. I've spent 8 years believing every word you said. I think I deserve the truth now." He studied her for a long moment, and she watched something like respect flicker in his eyes. Then he moved to the bar cart in the corner and poured himself a drink even though it was barely 8 in the morning. When he spoke again, his voice was different, quieter, more dangerous. "You want the truth, Elena. Are you sure? Because the truth is not a door you can close once it's opened. I want the truth. He took a long sip of whiskey, then set the glass down with a soft click that seemed to echo through the apartment. The flowers were not meant to come here. They were supposed to go to a different address. Someone made a mistake. A mistake that will be corrected. Who is she? There is no she. Not in the way you're thinking. Marcus moved closer, and even now, even with everything crumbling around her, Eleanor felt the pull of his presence. The flowers were part of a cover, Eleanor. A story we've been building for months to protect a federal witness. A woman whose testimony could bring down an entire criminal organization. Eleanor stared at him. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that the life you think we've been living, the business trips, the late nights, the phone calls, none of it has been what you believed. He paused, and when he continued, each word landed like a stone. I am not a businessman, Elena. I never have been. Then what are you? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with 8 years of accumulated lies. Marcus's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Elena saw something vulnerable in his eyes. Something almost like fear. I run one of the most powerful families in the American Northeast, he said finally. The Marchetti organization has controlled territory from New York to Boston for 3 generations. My grandfather built this empire. My father expanded it, and I have spent the last 20 years transforming it into something more, something that operates in the shadows between legal and illegal, power and protection. Eleanor felt the floor shift beneath her feet. You're telling me you're a crime boss. I'm telling you, I am the crime boss. The one they whisper about in boardrooms and back alleys. The one who decides which politicians rise and which fall. The one who keeps the peace between factions that would tear this city apart if left to their own devices. The world Elena had known for 8 years collapsed in that moment. Every memory, every tender moment, every whispered promise in the dark, all of it refracted through this new terrible lens of understanding. Our wedding, she whispered, the honeymoon in Tuscany, the charity, work, all of it was just real, Marcus said, moving closer. Every moment with you has been real, Elena. You are the one truth in a life built on necessary deception. Necessary? The word came out sharp, angry. You lied to me for 8 years. You let me believe I was married to a legitimate businessman while you were out there doing God knows what. I was protecting you. If you had known, you would have been in danger. You would have been a target. I'm a target anyway, aren't I? If what you're saying is true, then every person who wants to hurt you could use me to do it. Marcus's expression darkened. No one will touch you. I have made sure of that. Every member of my organization knows that my wife is protected by the full weight of my authority. To harm you would be to invite destruction. Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. So I've been living in a cage this whole time, a beautiful gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. You've been living in safety, in comfort, in a love that whatever else you might doubt has always been genuine. How can I believe anything you say now? The question struck home. Eleanor saw Marcus flinch, saw the crack in his carefully maintained control. For a moment he looked almost lost, a man standing on the edge of losing everything that mattered to him. Because I'm here, he said quietly. Because I'm telling you the truth when the smart move would be to maintain the lie. Because in 8 years of marriage I have done everything in my power to give you a good life, even if the foundation of that life was built on secrets. Elena turned away from him, walking to the window. The city stretched out below, millions of lives being lived in ignorance of the shadow world her husband inhabited. How many of those people walked past buildings Marcus owned, bought products from companies he controlled, voted for politicians whose campaigns he funded? The federal witness, she said finally, the woman the flowers were meant for. What happens to her? She's safe. My people moved her to a secure location last night. In 3 weeks she'll testify, and a man who has caused immeasurable suffering will spend the rest of his life behind bars. You're helping the federal government? When our interests align, yes. I am not a monster, Elena. I am a businessman, just not the kind you imagined. I maintain order. I provide protection. I make decisions that keep the violence contained instead of spilling into the streets. Elena pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window. I don't know what to do with this information. I don't know how to be your wife knowing what I know now. She heard him move closer, felt the warmth of his presence behind her. But he did not touch her. That restraint, perhaps, was its own kind of answer. You have options, he said. If you want to leave, I will not stop you. There is an account in your name, with enough money to start over anywhere in the world. You could disappear tomorrow, and I would make sure no one ever found you. Not my enemies, not the authorities, not me. You would let me go. Just like that. I would hate it. It would break something inside me that I'm not sure could ever be repaired. But yes, I would let you go. Because keeping you against your will would make me into the very thing you fear I am. Eleanor turned to face him then, and what she saw in his eyes surprised her. Not the cold calculation of a crime boss, not the charm of the man she thought she had married. Something rawer, more desperate, the look of a man standing at the edge of an abyss, waiting to learn if he would fall. I need time, she said. I need time to think about everything you've told me. I need to understand what this means for our marriage, for our future, for the life I thought I was living. Marcus nodded slowly. Take all the time you need. I'll have the guest suite prepared if you want space from me. But Elena, whatever you decide, please know that I love you. That has never been a lie. He left her standing by the window, the city sprawling beneath her feet like a kingdom she had never known she inhabited. The roses sat on the kitchen counter, their petals still perfect, still beautiful, still concealing the thorns beneath. On this Valentine's Day, Elena Marchetti had discovered that her husband was not a businessman. He was a king of shadows, a ruler of the underground, a man whose power extended further than she had ever imagined. And now she had to decide whether to remain his queen or walk away from everything she thought she knew. The winter sun continued its slow climb over Manhattan, indifferent to the upheaval taking place in the penthouse above. In the streets below, people hurried to work, to school, to lives uncomplicated by revelations of hidden empires. Eleanor watched them with something like envy. They did not know that a single morning could rewrite everything. They did not know that love and lies could exist in the same breath, but she knew now, and that knowledge would change everything. Check if you're already subscribed to this channel. These stories bring emotions and connections that you won't find anywhere else. If you enjoy deep human drama and characters you'll never forget, become part of this community now. 3 days passed in a strange kind of limbo. Elena stayed in the guest suite as Marcus had offered, a luxurious prison of silk sheets and designer furniture. She did not leave the apartment. She could not face the world outside, knowing what she now knew about the world inside. Marcus kept his distance as promised. She would see him sometimes in the kitchen early in the morning, pouring coffee with the careful movements of a man trying not to disturb something fragile. He would nod to her, ask if she needed anything, and accept her monosyllabic answers without complaint. Then he would disappear into his office or leave the apartment entirely. The door, closing behind him with a soft click that felt louder than any slam. On the 4th day, Elena began to explore. She started with the apartment itself, walking through rooms she had passed 1,000 times without really seeing. Marcus's office, usually locked, stood open, an invitation perhaps or a test. She stepped inside. The room was dominated by a massive desk of dark wood, its surface organized with military precision. Leather chairs faced each other across a Persian rug that probably cost more than her first car. But it was the walls that caught her attention. Photographs, dozens of them, framed in simple black, covering nearly every available inch. Eleanor moved closer, her breath catching as she recognized faces. There was Marcus as a young man, stern-faced and handsome, standing beside an older version of himself. His father, she realized. There were group shots of men in expensive suits, their expressions ranging from jovial to threatening, politicians she recognized from the news, business leaders whose names appeared in Forbes, and there, in a silver frame on the desk itself, was a photograph of their wedding day. Elena in white, laughing at something Marcus had said. Marcus looking at her like she was the only person in the world. She picked up the frame with trembling hands. Had he felt this way even then? Had he watched her walk down the aisle knowing the truth he was hiding? Or had he convinced himself that the lie was necessary, that protecting her from knowledge was the same as protecting her from harm? "I had that photograph commissioned," said a voice from the doorway. Eleanor did not turn around. She kept her eyes on the image, on the happiness frozen in silver and glass. Commissioned? The photographer was one of my people. He was there to watch for threats, not to capture memories. But he caught that moment, and I couldn't let it go. Now she turned. Marcus stood in the doorway, his tie loosened, his grey eyes guarded. He looked tired, she realized, exhausted in a way that went deeper than physical fatigue. "How do you do it?" she asked. "How do you live two lives at once?" "By keeping them separate, by building walls between the man I am with you and the man I have to be everywhere else." He stepped into the room but came no closer. "You are the only person in the world who has ever seen the real me, Elena. Not the boss, not the businessman, just Marcus. And losing that, losing you, it would be worse than any enemy could ever inflict." Elena set the photograph back on the desk. "Show me." "Show you what?" "Everything. The organization, the people, the world you've been hiding from me." She met his eyes directly. "If I'm going to make a decision about our marriage, I need to understand what I'm deciding about. Not stories, not explanations, the reality." Something flickered across Marcus's face. Surprise, perhaps, or hope. "That's not a simple request. Once you see certain things, you can't unsee them. I've been living blind for 8 years. I think I can handle open eyes." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Tomorrow, then. I'll take you to meet some people. But Elena, whatever happens, whatever you see, remember that every decision I've made has been to protect what we have, even when those decisions were wrong." She did not respond. She simply walked past him, back to the guest suite, back to another sleepless night of trying to reconcile the man she had married with, the man she had discovered. Tomorrow came with February cold and grey skies threatening snow. Elena dressed carefully, not in the designer clothes Marcus had bought her, but in a simple black dress she had owned before the marriage. It felt like armor. It felt like herself. Marcus was waiting in the foyer when she emerged, dressed in a dark suit that seemed to sharpen every angle of his presence. 2 men flanked him, both built like mountains, both watching Elena with carefully neutral expressions. "This is Vincent," Marcus said, nodding to the man on his right, "and Gabriel. They've been with the family since before I took over. They'll be accompanying us today." Eleanor looked at the 2 men and saw what she had somehow missed for 8 years, the careful alertness, the way they positioned themselves to monitor threats from multiple directions, the subtle bulges beneath their jackets that suggested concealed weapons. "I've seen them before," she said slowly. "At our anniversary party, at the charity gala. They were always around, weren't they? I just never really looked." "Part of their job is not to be seen," Marcus replied. "They've protected you every day of our marriage, without you ever knowing they were there." Vincent, the older of the 2, inclined his head slightly. "Mrs. Marchetti, it's an honor to formally meet you." The title struck Elena differently now. Mrs. Marchetti. She had taken that name 8 years ago, never knowing what it truly meant, never understanding the weight of the family she had joined. They took a private elevator to the basement garage, where a black SUV waited with tinted windows. Eleanor climbed inside, feeling like she was crossing another threshold into Marcus's hidden world. The city slid past the windows as they drove, familiar streets becoming strange under the lens of her new understanding. Their first stop was a restaurant in Little Italy. The front was unremarkable. Red awning, menu in the window, the smell of garlic and tomato sauce drifting through the air. But when they entered through a side door, Eleanor found herself in a different establishment entirely. The back room was elegant in an old-world way. Dark wood paneling, crystal chandeliers, paintings of Italian landscapes on the walls. A long table dominated the center of the space, and around it sat half a dozen men whose ages ranged from 30 to 70. They rose as Marcus entered, and Elena saw the respect in their movements. Not fear, though she suspected that existed too, but genuine deference. These men looked at her husband the way soldiers looked at a commander they trusted. "Gentlemen," Marcus said, his voice taking on a new quality. Harder, more authoritative. "My wife, Elena. She wants to understand our world. I expect you to answer her questions honestly." An older man with silver hair and kind eyes stepped forward. He took Elena's hand and bowed over it with old-fashioned courtesy. "Mrs. Marchetti, I'm Salvatore. DeLuca, I worked with your husband's father before him, and with his grandfather before that. The Marchetti family has led our organization for 3 generations. It has always been our honor." "Led it to do what, exactly?" Elena asked, keeping her voice steady. Salvatore exchanged a glance with Marcus, who nodded. "We provide services, Mrs. Marchetti. Protection for businesses that the police cannot or will not protect. Resolution for disputes that courts cannot handle. Opportunities for people who have been denied them through legitimate channels." He paused. "We also control certain imports and exports, goods that move between nations without the approval of governments that have proven themselves untrustworthy." "Smuggling," Elena said flatly. "Trade. Commerce that exists outside bureaucratic constraint." Salvatore's expression remained pleasant, but there was steel beneath it. "We do not traffic in human misery, Mrs. Marchetti. We do not exploit the desperate. That is a line the Marchetti family has never crossed." Marcus moved to the head of the table, and Elena saw how naturally he occupied the space. This was his throne room, she realized, his court. "My wife wants to understand who we are," he said. "Who I am. I have brought her here so you can tell her the truth, the good and the bad, because if she is to remain with me, it will be with full knowledge of what that means." The men around the table exchanged looks. Then, one by one, they began to speak. Elena listened for 3 hours. She heard stories of protection rackets that had evolved into legitimate security firms, of gambling operations that had become licensed casinos, of loan sharking that had transformed into private banking for clients too controversial for traditional institutions. She heard about enemies who had been dealt with permanently. Marcus did not hide from that reality. And she heard about families who had been protected, about witnesses who had been safeguarded, about corrupt officials who had been exposed. It was not a simple picture. There were shadows everywhere, moral compromises that made her stomach turn. But there was also something else, a code, a structure, a sense of order in what she had assumed was pure chaos. When they left the restaurant, snow was falling over the city. Fat flakes drifted past the SUV's windows, softening the hard edges of Manhattan's skyline. Elena sat in silence, processing everything she had heard. "There's more," Marcus said, quietly. "If you want to see it, show me." Their second stop was a building in the Bronx. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary community center, cheerful murals on the walls, children's artwork in the windows. Inside, Eleanor found a daycare facility, a medical clinic, and what appeared to be a job training center, all operating under one roof. "The Marchetti Family Foundation," Marcus explained as they walked through, "completely legitimate, completely legal. We fund after-school programs, medical care for those without insurance, job placement services for people trying to rebuild their lives. Everything here is clean. No connection to any of our other operations." Eleanor watched a young mother receive a bag of groceries from a volunteer. She watched a teenager receive tutoring in a quiet corner. She watched an elderly man get his prescriptions filled without any exchange of money. "Why?" she asked. "Because power without purpose is just tyranny." Marcus's voice was low, meant only for her. "My grandfather started this organization to protect Italian immigrants who had no one else to turn to. Somewhere along the way, it became something darker. But I swore when I took control that I would bring it back to what it was meant to be: protection, community, care for those who fall through society's cracks. Eleanor turned to face him fully. And the other things? The violence? The illegal operations? Still necessary, still real. I won't pretend otherwise. His grey eyes held hers without flinching. The world is not gentle, Elena. There are people who prey on the weak, who exploit the vulnerable, who use power for nothing but personal gain. Someone has to stand against them. The law cannot do it alone. The system is too slow, too compromised, too willing to look the other way when money changes hands. So you appointed yourself judge and jury. I became what was needed, what my family has always been. He reached for her hand, and she did not pull away. I am not asking you to approve. I'm not asking you to understand. I'm only asking you to see me, all of me, and then decide if you can love what you see. The snow continued to fall as they returned to the SUV. Elena's mind was spinning with contradictions, with questions, with a growing realization that the world was far more complex than she had ever imagined. She had married a crime boss, a man who broke laws without hesitation, who commanded respect through a combination of fear and loyalty, who had built an empire in the shadows of legitimate society. But she had also married a man who funded clinics for the poor, who protected vulnerable witnesses, who looked at her with eyes full of desperate love. How could both things be true? How could she reconcile the husband she had known with the boss she was discovering? The answer, she realized, was that she could not. Not easily, not quickly. But perhaps with time, she could find a way to hold both truths in her heart and decide which one weighed more heavily. 2 weeks passed. Elena moved back into the master bedroom. It was not forgiveness. She was not sure forgiveness was possible, not yet. But it was a choice to stay, to watch, to try to understand the man she had married before deciding whether their marriage could survive. Marcus seemed to understand. He did not push for intimacy or declarations of love. He simply existed alongside her, present and patient, giving her space while making clear that he would be there whenever she was ready. Their routine shifted to accommodate this new reality. In the mornings, Elena would find Marcus in his office, often on the phone with people whose names she was beginning to recognize. She would bring him coffee, a small gesture, a bridge between worlds, and sometimes she would stay to listen. She was learning. Every day she learned more about the organization he commanded, the hierarchy of captains and soldiers, the territorial boundaries that divided the Northeast, the delicate diplomacy required to maintain peace between rival families. It was like discovering a hidden country that had existed alongside her own reality, invisible until someone showed her how to see. And she was learning about Marcus, the real Marcus, unmasked and unguarded. She learned that he woke every morning at 5 to exercise, pushing his body through brutal workouts that seemed more like penance than fitness. She learned that he read philosophy at night, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Machiavelli, seeking wisdom from men who had grappled with power and its corruptions. She learned that he visited his father's grave every Sunday, standing in silence before a marble headstone that bore the name of a man who had raised him to rule. She learned that he was afraid of losing her, not in the way of weak men who clung to women as possessions, but in the way of someone who had built walls around his heart so carefully that one crack threatened to bring the entire structure down. She saw it in the way he watched her when he thought she was not looking, in the way his hands trembled slightly when they accidentally touched, in the way he said her name like it was a prayer he was not sure would be answered. On the morning of March 3rd, Elena made a decision. She found Marcus in the kitchen, making breakfast with the focused intensity he brought to everything. Eggs were sizzling in a pan, toast was browning, and the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. He looked up when she entered, and she saw the familiar flash of hope and fear in his eyes. "I want to be involved," she said without preamble. Marcus set down the spatula. "Involved how?" "The foundation, the community programs. I want to do more than watch. I want to help." Something shifted in his expression. Relief, perhaps, or gratitude. "You're sure?" "I'm a nurse, Marcus. I've spent my entire career helping people. That hasn't changed just because I've learned things about my husband. I didn't know before. She moved closer, and for the first time in weeks she reached out and touched his hand. I can't fix what you've done. I can't undo the lies or the violence or any of it, but I can choose what happens next, and I choose to do something meaningful with the position I've found myself in. Marcus turned his hand over, his fingers interlacing with hers. The foundation could use someone with your experience, the medical clinic especially. They've been struggling to find qualified staff who can be trusted. Trusted to keep secrets, you mean? Trusted to care about the people we serve more than the politics surrounding how we serve them. Eleanor nodded slowly. Then I'll start there. Show me what you need, and I'll figure out how to provide it. What followed was a transformation Elena had not anticipated. She threw herself into work at the foundation with the same dedication she had once brought to emergency room nursing. She reorganized the clinic, recruited volunteers from medical schools across the city, established protocols that improved care while maintaining the discretion the organization required. And somewhere along the way, she began to see Marcus differently, not as the businessman she had married, not as the crime boss she had discovered, but as something more complex, more human. A man caught between the legacy of his family and his own desire for something better. A man who made terrible choices for what he believed were good reasons. A man who loved her with an intensity that frightened him. She saw it when he visited the foundation, watching quietly as she worked. She saw it when he came home late and checked on her before going to his own rest. She saw it in the small gestures, flowers that appeared without occasion, notes left on her pillow, a new piece of medical equipment delivered to the clinic with no explanation except, "Thought you might need this." He was courting her again, she realized. Winning her back, not through grand gestures, but through consistent, quiet proof that he was capable of being the man she needed. It was working. On a Thursday evening in late March, Elena came home to find the penthouse transformed. Candles flickered on every surface, their warm light casting soft shadows on the walls. Music played softly, the song from their first dance at the wedding, and Marcus stood in the center of it all, looking more nervous than she had ever seen him. "What is this?" she asked. "An apology," he said. "A beginning. Whatever you want it to be." She walked toward him slowly, aware of how her heart was racing, aware of the choice she was making with every step. "I don't know if I can forgive you. Not completely. Maybe not ever. I know. I don't know if I can trust you. Not the way I did before. I know that too. But I think—" She stopped in front of him, close enough to feel his warmth, to see the vulnerability he was offering like a gift. "I think I want to try. Think I want to build something new with you, something honest." Marcus raised his hand to her face, his touch gentle as a whisper. "I will spend every day earning that chance, every day for the rest of my life." And when he kissed her, Eleanor felt something shift inside her chest. Not the naive love of the woman who had walked down the aisle 8 years ago, something deeper, harder, more real. The love of a woman who had seen the truth and chosen to stay anyway. The night deepened around them, and somewhere in the city below the world continued its endless turning. But in this penthouse above Manhattan, two people began the slow, difficult work of rebuilding what lies had broken. Now, I want to ask you something. Type in the comments the phrase, "Love is a choice." If you believe that love is a decision we make every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, let me know. Leave your comment right now and show that you're one of the people who truly understands what it means to choose love. The threat arrived on a morning that had seemed ordinary. Elena was at the clinic reviewing patient files with Dr. Sarah Chen, a young physician who had joined the foundation 3 weeks earlier. The waiting room was full, mothers with sick children, elderly men seeking medication, teenagers with injuries they did not want to explain to hospital staff. It was chaos, but it was Elena's kind of chaos. Purposeful, meaningful. Then Marcus appeared in the doorway. She knew immediately that something was wrong. His face had that closed, dangerous quality she had come to recognize, the mask he wore when the boss needed to emerge. Behind him stood Vincent and Gabriel, their expressions equally grave. "We need to talk," Marcus said. "Privately." Eleanor excused herself and followed him to the small office at the back of the clinic. The door had barely closed before he spoke. "There's been a development. Giacomo Caruso, the man whose testimony we've been protecting, his location has been compromised." Elena felt her stomach drop. She had learned about Caruso over the past weeks. A former accountant for a rival organization, he had turned federal witness after discovering that his employers were planning to expand their operations into human exploitation, the kind of activities that even the criminal underworld considered unforgivable. "How?" she asked. "We don't know yet, but it means more than just his safety being at risk." Marcus's jaw tightened. "The people looking for him, the Rossetti family, they know we've been sheltering him, which means they know about the foundation, about this clinic." The implication hit Elena like a physical blow. The patients, the families who come here, are potential targets, not because they matter to the Rossettis, but because hurting them would hurt us. Marcus moved closer, his voice dropping. "I'm putting additional security on every foundation property. Vincent will be assigned specifically to you. I need you to accept that without argument." Elena wanted to argue anyway. She had spent weeks building something meaningful here, and the thought of armed guards changing everything made her want to scream. But she saw the fear in Marcus's eyes, not for himself but for her, and she swallowed her protests. "How long? Until we neutralize the threat? Could be days, could be weeks. And Caruso? Being moved to a new location as we speak. The federal authorities are accelerating his testimony. 3 days from now he'll be in a courtroom, and the Rossetti family will have bigger problems than revenge. 3 days. Elena could survive 3 days, but the days stretched on, and the threat grew rather than diminished. It started with small things, a car that lingered too long outside the clinic, a deliveryman whose credentials did not check out, phone calls to the foundation that ended in silence when answered. Each incident was minor on its own, but together they formed a pattern of surveillance that made Elena's skin crawl. She kept working. What else could she do? The patient still needed care, the clinic still needed to function, and Elena refused to let fear dictate her life. But she was aware now, in a way she had not been before, of the danger that existed just beyond the walls of her carefully constructed world. On the second night, she woke to find Marcus sitting in the darkness of their bedroom, fully dressed, watching the door. "Have you slept at all?" she asked. "Sleep can wait." Elena sat up, pulling the sheets around her. "You can't protect me from everything, Marcus, no matter how much you want to. I can try." His voice was rough with exhaustion and something else, a desperation that cut through the darkness between them. "You chose to stay, Eleanor, you chose to try. I will not let my enemies take that choice away." She crossed to him then, kneeling beside his chair, taking his hands in hers. His fingers were cold, tense, gripping hers like a lifeline. "We're in this together now," she said. "Whatever comes. I need you to believe that." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, and she watched the mask crack, watched the fear and love and hope battle behind his eyes. Then he pulled her close, burying his face in her hair, and for a few precious moments they simply held each other. The crisis came on the third day. Eleanor was alone in the clinic's back office when she heard the commotion in the waiting room. Raised voices. Something. Crashing, the sound of children crying. She moved toward the door, but before she could open it, Vincent was there, pushing her back. "Stay here," he ordered. "Lock the door." "What's happening?" "Someone got past security. They're looking for you." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs, but her nurse's training kicked in. Panic was useless. Action was what mattered. "The patients," she said. "The children are being evacuated through the side entrance. Dr. Chen is handling it." Vincent's expression softened slightly. "Please, Mrs. Marchetti, let us do our job." She locked the door behind him, then moved to the window. The office looked out onto an alley, and what she saw made her blood run cold. Two men in dark clothes, moving toward the building with purpose. She did not recognize them, but she recognized what they were. Hunters, and she was the prey. Think, she told herself. There had to be something she could do, some way to help rather than simply hiding and hoping. Her eyes landed on the fire alarm mounted on the wall. It would alert emergency services. It would bring police, firefighters, chaos that the attackers had not planned for. It was something. She pulled it. The alarm screamed to life, a piercing wail that filled the building and spilled out into the street. Outside she saw the two men hesitate, exchange confused glances. This was not part of their plan. The door to the office shook as someone tried to force it open. Elena backed away, looking for anything she could use as a weapon. Her hand closed around a heavy paperweight, a gift from Marcus, she realized with bitter irony, and she raised it, ready to fight. But the door did not open. Instead, she heard scuffling, a muffled impact, and then silence. "Mrs. Marchetti," Vincent's voice came through the door. "It's over. You can come out." She unlocked the door to find Vincent standing over a man who lay unconscious on the floor, his hands already being bound by Gabriel. The waiting room was empty. The patients had been successfully evacuated, and in the distance she could hear sirens approaching. "Is anyone hurt?" she demanded. "No, they never made it past the front desk." Vincent's expression was grim but satisfied. The alarm was smart thinking. It threw them off long enough for backup to arrive. Elena looked down at the unconscious man, and then at the paperweight still clutched in her hand. She had been ready to fight, ready to defend herself, her patients, the world she had built in these past weeks. Something had changed, she realized. She was no longer the woman who had stood frozen in her kitchen, reading a card meant for someone else. She was no longer the wife who had simply accepted what her husband chose to tell her. She was someone new, someone stronger, someone who could stand beside Marcus in the shadows and hold her own. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like freedom. The aftermath of the attack brought revelations Elena had not anticipated. The man who had been captured, one of 3 who had attempted to breach the clinic, broke under questioning. Not through violence. Marcus made clear that such methods were beneath them, but through careful manipulation, through promises and threats delivered with equal precision, the truth emerged. The Rossetti family had not simply discovered Caruso's location through intelligence gathering. They had been given the information by someone inside the Marchetti organization. A traitor. Elena watched Marcus receive the news in his office, saw the way his expression shuttered and his hands curled into fists. She had come to know that look over the past weeks, the look of a man preparing to do terrible things. "Who?" she asked quietly. "Roberto Castelli. He's been with us for 15 years. Trusted. Respected." Marcus's voice was flat, controlled, but she could hear the rage simmering beneath. "He was present when we discussed Caruso's protection. He knew everything." "Why would he betray you?" "The Rossettis offered him territory, control of operations in New Jersey, a chance to build his own empire." Marcus looked at her then, and the pain in his eyes was raw. "Loyalty has a price, Elena. I always knew that, but I believed." He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Elena moved to his side, placing her hand on his arm. "What happens now? Now we find him, and we make sure he can never threaten anyone again." She should have been horrified. The woman she had been 2 months ago would have recoiled from the implication in those words, but she had seen too much now, understood too much about the world Marcus inhabited. "Be careful," she said instead. "Whatever you do, be careful." Marcus turned to face her fully, and something shifted in his expression. The rage was still there, but there was something else now. Wonder, perhaps, or gratitude. "You're not asking me to show mercy. Would mercy make us safer?" "No." "Then I won't ask for it." Elena met his eyes without flinching. "I'm not naive anymore, Marcus. I know what your world requires. I'm asking you to survive it and come back to me." He kissed her then, hard and desperate and full of everything he could not put into words. When they separated, he rested his forehead against hers, breathing heavily. "I will always come back to you," he promised. Always. The hunt for Roberto Castelli lasted 4 days. Elena spent those days in a state of suspended animation, moving through her routine at the clinic while waiting for news. Vincent remained her constant shadow, a silent presence that she had stopped resenting and started appreciating. He was good company, she discovered, quiet but observant, loyal in a way that went beyond employment. On the second day, she asked him about his own story. "I grew up in the organization," he said. They were sitting in the clinic's back office, sharing coffee, while Eleanor reviewed supply orders. "My father was one of Mr. Marchetti's captains, not the current Mr. Marchetti, his father. I've known Marcus since he was 12 years old." "What was he like, as a boy?" Vincent considered the question, serious, intense. Even then, he carried the weight of what he would become. "His father was not a gentleman, Mrs. Marchetti. He prepared Marcus for leadership the way soldiers are prepared for battle. By the time he was 16, Marcus had seen things that would break most adults." Elena thought of the man she had married, the one who had seemed so confident and charming at that charity gala. She had assumed his polish was natural, the result of privilege and education. Now she understood it was armor, protection against a childhood that had demanded too much too soon. "But he was also kind," Vincent continued. "I saw him give his own coat to a homeless veteran once when he thought no one was watching. I saw him pay for a colleague's mother's surgery without ever expecting repayment. The man he... Presence to the world is not false, Mrs. Marchetti. It's just incomplete." On the 4th day, Marcus came home. He walked through the door just after midnight, and Elena knew immediately from his expression that the situation had been resolved. His suit was immaculate, his movements controlled, but there was a weight lifted from his shoulders that had not been there before. "It's done," he said. "Castelli has been dealt with. The Rossettis have received a message they will not forget." Eleanor did not ask for details. She did not need them. She simply crossed to him and wrapped her arms around him, holding on tight. "And Caruso?" she asked against his chest. "Testified yesterday. The Rossetti leadership is facing federal charges. Their organization will be dismantled by the summer." Marcus's arms tightened around her. "We're safe, Elena. We're finally safe." She wanted to believe him. More than anything, she wanted to believe that the danger had passed, that they could move forward into something resembling normal life. But she had learned too much in these past months to be truly naive again. "For now," she said softly. "We're safe for now." Marcus pulled back to look at her, and she saw understanding in his eyes. He knew what she meant. There would always be threats, always be enemies, always be the next crisis waiting in the shadows. That was the life he had chosen, the life she had chosen to share. "For now is enough," he said. "For now, we have each other. For now, we have a chance to build something worth protecting." Eleanor thought of the clinic, of the patients who depended on her, of the work she had discovered she loved. She thought of the foundation, of the children in the after-school programs, of the families receiving assistance they could find nowhere else. She thought of Marcus, flawed and dangerous and loving her with an intensity that still took her breath away. "Then let's build it," she said, "together." The winter had passed. Spring was coming, and in a penthouse above Manhattan, two people who had found each other through lies and discovered truth on the other side stood together, ready to face whatever came next. 6 months later, Elena stood in the garden of a vineyard in Tuscany, wearing white. The setting was different from their first wedding, intimate rather than extravagant, surrounded by people who knew the truth about who they were. But the feeling was the same, that flutter of joy and fear and hope that came with making. Promises meant to last forever. Marcus waited at the end of the flower-strewn path, his grey eyes bright with emotion. He wore a simple dark suit, no tie, and he had never looked more beautiful to her. Not the polished businessman of their first meeting, not the dangerous boss she had discovered, Just Marcus, the man she had chosen to love with full knowledge of who he was. Vincent stood beside him as best man. On Elena's side stood Dr. Sarah Chen, who had become more than a colleague over the past months, a true friend who understood the complexity of Elena's life without judgment. The ceremony was brief, conducted in Italian by a priest who had known the Marchetti family for generations. Elena spoke her vows with a clear voice, each word carrying the weight of everything they had survived to reach this moment. I take you as my husband, not the man I thought you were, but the man I know you to be. I promise to stand beside you in the light and in the shadow. I promise to build with you, to protect with you, to love you without illusions or conditions. From this day forward, whatever we face together. Marcus's vows were simpler, but no less powerful. I give you my truth, all of it, every shadow and every light. I give you my protection, not because you are weak, but because you are precious. I give you my future, whatever it holds. You are my home, Elena. You have always been my home. When they kissed, the small crowd applauded, captains and their wives, foundation staff, the handful of people who had earned the trust of the Marchetti family. It was a beginning, Elena thought, a true beginning, born from the ashes of the life they had lived before. The reception lasted until the stars appeared over the Tuscan hills. Wine flowed, food appeared in endless courses, and for one perfect evening, the darkness that surrounded their world seemed very far away. But even in paradise, reality intruded. Elena was on the terrace, watching the sunset paint the vineyard's gold, when Vincent approached with a phone. I apologize, Mrs. Marchetti, but there's something you should see. The phone showed a news broadcast, American news, streaming live despite the distance. The headline made Elena's heart stop. Federal witness Giacomo Caruso found deceased in protective custody. Authorities suspect foul play. The world seemed to tilt around her. Caruso was dead. The man whose testimony had brought down the Rossetti family, whose protection had led to so much upheaval in her life, gone. Marcus appeared at her side, took one look at the screen, and his expression hardened into the mask she knew so well. The Rossettis, he said, even from prison, they found a way. What does this mean for us? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was heavy with the weight of experience. It means we stay vigilant. It means we never forget that the life we've chosen has costs. He took her hand, bringing it to his lips. But it also means we don't let them steal our joy, not today, not ever. Eleanor looked at her husband truly now in a way he had not been before, and made a choice. The same choice she had been making every day since that Valentine's morning when her world had shattered and reformed. She chose hope. Then let's go back to our guests, she said. Let's celebrate what we have, while we have it. The party continued into the night, and if Marcus spent more time than usual with his phone, conferring quietly with Vincent about security measures and contingency plans, Elena understood. This was their life, beautiful and dangerous, safe and threatened, a constant balance between the light and the shadow. When they finally retired to their suite, exhausted and happy and full of good wine and better food, Elena stood at the window and looked out at the moon rising over Tuscany. I never imagined this, she said softly. When I was a nurse in Queens, working double shifts and barely making rent, I never imagined ending up here. Marcus wrapped his arms around her from behind. Regrets? No. And she meant it. Questions, fears, uncertainties about the future, but not regrets. How can I regret the path that led me to you? Even knowing what you know now? Elena turned in his arms to face him, especially knowing what I know now. Because now I'm not loving a fantasy, Marcus. I'm loving a real man, with real flaws, who has done real things I can't always accept. And that, love is worth more than any dream. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. I will spend every day trying to be worthy of that love. You already are. That's what you still don't understand. She took his face in her hands. Being worthy isn't about being perfect. It's about choosing to be better every day despite everything that tries to drag you down. You make that choice, Marcus. Every single day, you make that choice. They stood together in the moonlight, two people who had found each other through circumstance and built something real through choice. The future was uncertain. The shadows would always be there, waiting at the edges of their happiness. But for now, for this moment, on this night, in this place, they were together. They were safe. They were home. Epilogue. 1 year later, the clinic had expanded to 3 locations across New York City. The foundation's annual budget had tripled, and Elena Marchetti, once a nurse who had married a man she did not truly know, had become something she never expected, a leader in her own right. She walked through the newest clinic's grand opening with the confidence of someone who had found her purpose. Politicians attended, journalists documented, and behind the scenes, the Marchetti organization ensured that everything ran smoothly. Marcus watched from the corner of the room, and when their eyes met, he smiled. Not the charming smile of the businessman he had once pretended to be. Something warmer, more real. Later, when the guests had gone and the staff was cleaning up, they walked together through the empty halls. "You've built something extraordinary," Marcus said. "We've built something extraordinary. I couldn't have done any of this without you. You could have, you just didn't have to." Eleanor stopped walking and turned to face him. After everything, the revelations, the danger, the slow rebuilding of trust, she still felt that flutter of joy when she looked at him. She suspected she always would. "I have something to tell you," she said. Marcus's expression shifted to concern. "What is it?" Elena took his hand and placed it on her stomach, flat still, unchanged to the eye. But she had known for 2 weeks, had been waiting for the right moment to share the news. "The family is growing," she said softly, "whether you're ready or not." For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. His hand remained on her stomach, his eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her heart race. Then he dropped to his knees. Right there in the empty clinic, the most powerful man in New York's underground knelt before his wife with tears in his eyes. "A baby," he whispered. "Elena, we're having a baby. We're having a baby." He pressed his lips to her stomach, and she felt the tremor that ran through him. Fear, she knew. Joy. The overwhelming weight of what this meant for both of them. "I swear," he said against her skin, "I will protect this child with everything I have. I will build a world where they can grow up safe and loved. I will be the father my father never was. I swear it, Eleanor." "I know you will." She ran her fingers through his hair. "That's why I'm not afraid." And she was not. Not of the future, not of the shadows, not of the life they would bring their child into. Because she had learned something in this past year that had changed everything. Fear was not the absence of love, and love was not the absence of fear. Love was the choice you made when both existed. When you saw the truth and stayed anyway, when you felt the danger and built anyway, when you knew the risks and hoped anyway. Marcus rose and pulled her into his arms, and they stood together in the fading light, two people who had walked through fire and emerged holding hands. The future was uncertain, it always would be, but they would face it together with courage and honesty and a love that had been tested by truth and found unbreakable. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm. People hurried past, living their lives, unaware of the world that existed alongside their own. A world of shadows and power, of danger and protection, of men who ruled in darkness and women who taught them to find the light. Elena had entered that world through accident. She had stayed by choice. And now, with new life growing inside her, she would help shape its future. Not a fairy tale. Something better. A true story, lived with eyes wide open and heart fully committed. If you've watched this far, it's because you like this story. Leave a comment saying, "I've watched this far so I can get to know you and see who really enjoys the stories here on the channel." I would love to know you better. If this story touched your heart, made you think, or simply kept you company today, please leave your like. It only takes a second, but it makes all the difference. And share this video with someone who needs to believe that love can survive even the hardest truths. Finally, if you're not yet subscribed, what are you waiting for? Click the subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss another story, because this is just the beginning and the best is yet to come. Thank you for being here. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for choosing to believe in stories that show us who we can become. Until the next one.